That's all. Oh, is the camera on me? Zane? Are you there?
Oh God. Why do I let you do this?
Zane? Why did you let me shave my face?
Why do I let you on the show to do this? Why do I let this into the world?
I think I don't know. I mean, I don't know. You have to ask yourself those questions, Zane. All right, I just perform.
I do. SNL skits from 35 years ago come to life. Conor Rebush. If only you lived in Chicago. I mean, Ohio's pretty good. Like, you do look core Ohio.
Screw you. You look core Pacific Northwest, you son of a bitch.
No. Here, I'll help you out. For that.
There we go.
Yeah.
Now we both fit into some American geographic stereotypes perfectly.
Here, get some spaghetti with some chili on it.
I don't understand why that sounds so bad. Okay, not to derail the whole video, Zane, but I have about a half an hour worth of stuff to say about why Skyline is good and why people should appreciate it.
Well, okay. Yeah, you're from fucking Ohio. Everybody knows that you have that in your back pocket. Wait.
Listen, many cities in the United States have meat sauce and they put it on hot dogs.
No. Okay, welcome everyone to the MMA Vivisection with me, Zane Simon, and my co-host, Conor Rebush. We are here to talk about UFC 221. Romero versus Rockhold. And a pay-per-view that is both like a reasonable hardcore fans pay-per-view and an absolutely terrible pay-per-view in every other single sense.
Yeah. It is only, as we said when we were discussing this last week, it is only because there are like personal favorites of mine as a weird MMA nerd on this card that allows me to say that I kind of like it. And if you don't have like a personal investment in the careers of people like Mizuto Hirota and Ben Nguyen, and Li Jingliang, then it is a complete dog shit pay-per-view. And I could never fault you for saying that.
Now, I had somebody the other day talking to me, and they're like, oh, well, you got to really, and I've seen this come up a couple of times now, they're like, there are stuff for hardcore fans to like on this. There are some good fights that are like well booked and interesting and like they could be really cool to watch. And it's like, yes, you're not wrong. The matchmaking in and of itself is not bad. It's in general not been a problem recently with the UFC. The fights that are getting booked are not bad fights. However, if nothing else, Curtis Blaydes, Tuivasa, and Saparbek Safarov fight like incredibly. They fight like novices. They fight like complete MMA novices.
Yeah, which two of them are.
Yeah, and they make up half of a pay-per-view card. And at some point, like, if you're talking about actual quality, if you're talking about elite fighters putting on elite performances, none of them look capable of that. They may win, but none of them look capable of performing at an elite level right now. Of putting together a technical performance where you're like, wow, that was a great looking fight. Yeah,
well, your critique of the Jacare versus Brunson 2 card was that nobody was 3 fights from a title shot.
Yeah.
And this is barely separated from that. This has Formiga Nguyen as the first fight on the Fox Sports 1 prelims. Both of those guys are conceivably 3 fights from a title shot, and largely because, Formiga's always been in that conversation, but largely because their division is so shallow. Yeah. And Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold, which, while being very close to a title shot, thinking of that gives you the sour taste, remembering that this was supposed to be a title fight.
Yeah.
That it was supposed to be Whitaker Rockhold. And it's not like it's any worse of a matchup. I'm still fascinated by Romero Rockhold. That's a matchup I've wanted to see for years. It's just that this is a pay-per-view. It's not that much better than that Fox card we decried for being the worst Fox card they'd ever put together. So this is the modern UFC. And I feel like every show I do, any article I write now, always now contains a small section where I am bitching and complaining about how there's no narrative and no momentum and no feeling of importance to these cards. But that's because I'm awash in it. Every single card is like this. When somebody says, hey, you know, well, the matchups look good, all I can think is they always look fine. It's just that none of them feel like anything.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll leave that aside and actually get into the meat of this card. And I've actually tried to this time, due to complaints, which are reasonable, to spend a lot of time fiddling with it. I've tried to plan out who goes when and takes which turn, so I won't get lost constantly.
Oh God!
Which means if I'm consulting my notes correctly, you should be the one to start.
That's always the hardest one to remember, so we're off to a good start. Luke Jumeau versus Daichi Abe. I think this fight has the potential to actually be quite boring. Only because both guys really, really like to counter.
Love it.
Yeah. Daichi Abe can lead, but he had a lot of trouble doing so in his UFC debut against Hyun Lim. He wasn't sure how to lead unpredictably. He couldn't really change his tempo. He didn't feint much.
I would say that that's actually probably the best lead performance of Daichi Abe's career, too.
Right. Yeah. So he is very, very much a counterpuncher, dyed in the wool. Luke Jumeau, exactly the same. He does not like to lead at all. He lets his opponent dictate the pace, which means we are very likely in for an extremely slow-paced fight. Fortunately, it should at least be a little tense because both of these guys have power in their hands. They're both accurate strikers. They both have good timing on counters. It's just a matter of how many opportunities they're going to get. So adding into that dynamic, the fact that Daichi Abe does have a pretty respectable takedown game as a judoka. He's got some neat, interesting entries and trips that he likes to hit that blend into his striking. So one of the ways that he can actually change things up when he is forced to lead. And the fact that I think he's just faster than Luke Jumeau, that he's just snappier and more explosive when he does strike. That's why I favor him. I think it's probably going to be a razor close fight all the way, though.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm picking Abe mostly behind the idea that he is actually a little bit willing to lead, and when he does, like, it's not unpredictable, it's not pretty, but he can put hands on people and, you know, create enough offense moment to moment to be leading the fight. And even though he's been stung a couple times in fights before, Jumeau is just so passive. Like, Abe's never been knocked out, and Jumeau is so passive that it's just like, you might knock him out maybe if he really walks onto just the right punch.
He took some heaters from Hyun Lim, who was a huge puncher, and it didn't really seem to affect him. I mean, the only one that remotely wobbled him was when he was throwing a kick at the same time.
Yeah, and Jumeau, you know, a lot of it is he will just stand there and kind of get hit or let opponents work offense, and then every now and then come back with that like one huge counter shot that if it's not enough to put somebody away, he's losing the fight. So
neither of these guys is particularly proactive as far as counterpunchers go, but Abe does have a jab, and he does have a quick inside low kick, and he will peck away between counter punches with those, whereas I don't really know what Jumeau does between counters.
Abe also has a very educated lead hand counter.
Yeah.
Which Jumeau does not. I don't nearly.
Not really. He's not as he relies more on that right hand. Abe seems comfortable with both.
Yep. So odds have Abe favored. He opened at -155, adjusted up to -129, and has been falling right back down to -155. Jumeau opened at +125, adjusted down to +108, and has risen back up to +130. I like that.
Mhm.
Both guys hit hard. Neither guy has been knocked out. Both guys like a slow-paced counter fight, so they're both going to get the fight they like. And just favor Abe slightly in that matchup.
Yep, very slightly. And Abe, it also is worth mentioning, still quite inexperienced. So he should not be that much of a heavy favorite. We don't really know anything about how. I mean, he barely passed the decision-making test against a very predictable fighter in Hyun Lim. So close one.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to Ishihara versus Quinonez and a bantamweight bout.
Whose turn is this?
We're just gonna fuck this. We're just gonna fuck the whole thing of like I'll remember every time, and we're still yes. This will be lovely for everybody, I'm sure. No, bantamweight bout: Teruto Ishihara, Jose Quinonez, or Jose Quinonez. I get too used to the damn Brazilians.
I know. Brazilians exist only to make Americans who follow MMA look like idiots in front of Americans who don't follow MMA. Like,
That's
no,
right.
idiot, it's Jorge. And I'm like, no, it's George, dumbass. Yeah.
Yeah. This is a tough fight to pick. There are the biggest X factor being Ishihara's drop to bantamweight. His first fight down a division. And what that means. Will that make his power, really slow-paced power game more dangerous as a more powerful, bigger fighter? Or will he be slower and no longer have the speed advantage on his punches that was such a huge difference maker at featherweight? I'm going to kind of bet on the second one, honestly. Partially, I don't necessarily trust that, if the cut saps his cardio at all. Ishihara has always been a fighter who gets worse as the fight goes on. He's never been a fighter that he really finds his timing and his range and everything starts to click as the fight moves forward. It's like, no, he actually tends to start out hot and shock people out of the gate with his left hand. And if he doesn't, then he gets predictable. And people read his left hand, they learn how to avoid it, and he doesn't have a lot of other tools to go in behind it. Quinonez, he's got a good kicking game from range. He's been developing more confidence in a reasonably technical boxing game that he's had for a while, but is not, I think it's only lately that I've started to see him really feel like he can pick people off and stay at range and not just close down and jump into the clinch behind punches. He's got a reasonable takedown game from the clinch using trips and a good clinch game using knees and bridging off of those trips when he doesn't get them. The other big thing is, honestly, I just think that, the biggest thing is I don't think Ishihara can change things up enough, and I don't trust him to catch Quinonez out of the gate early. I think Quinonez is too light on his feet, too able to dictate range and pace in the way he wants, and then as the fight goes on, he's going to be better able to adjust. If he can't get Ishihara down, I don't think Ishihara is going to get him down or keep him down if he does. And I think Quinonez is just going to be the busier fighter. Ishihara still doesn't react well defensively to strikes. He's less of a his counter game is such that he either has to get the counter just perfectly, or he just gets hit a bunch and can't counter.
Yeah.
It's not like anytime you're walking in on him and throwing, even if you hit him, he's going to have the perfect counter to answer it. It's like, no, if he can slip and feint and time you just right off of pressure, then he can counter perfectly. And if he can't, he's just going to kind of swing and hope or just get hit, and that's it. So I'm taking Quinonez here. If it works out, if Ishihara is just as fast as he used to be, there's no saying that he can't just catch Quinonez and knock him out. Quinonez has been knocked out before. But it kind of, for a fighter in Ishihara who either has to win big early or ends up in a scrappy decision late, I got to take Quinonez in that fight.
Yeah. Alongside Michinori Tanaka, Teruto Ishihara is the only like Team Alpha Male member who doesn't seem to have great stamina.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually a strong point for every single member of that team, is that they are exceptionally well conditioned. And that makes it even more puzzling to me that he would want to cut to 135. Especially because, as you noted, he is a fighter who, lacking some sort of depth or creativity or even maybe just confidence, tends to get figured out. He surprises people with his speed and his power early, and then they get used to him because there's not a lot of depth or variety. So that, speed is really at it. They say speed kills, right? But speed kills early on.
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be surprised how quickly you can get used to speed if the tempo is predictable. It's as easy to time something that's 200 beats per minute as it is something that's 80 beats per minute once you've had a chance to hear a few bars. So I don't really understand the thought process behind that choice. And it makes it kind of easy for me to pick Jose Quinonez because he, I think, is very well sized for 135. He is a really good athlete by my estimation, not of like the Yoel Romero crazy mesomorph type, but of the like Yair Rodriguez insane dexterity, agility, and proprioception kind. He's quick. He seems to pack some power. He makes that work for him in a lot of ways, especially hitting takedowns. I have a feeling he'll probably treat this fight the way he treated his bout with Joey Gomez, and just try to hit a lot of takedowns in between tricky boxing exchanges where he uses his movement to confuse Ishihara and set him up. Yeah, I think Quinonez is, Ishihara is super dangerous, of course, and I have no idea. He may look good at 135. Maybe this also presages a pretty massive change in how he approaches his training.
Yeah, maybe it's a change in dieting better, working out better, partying less, all the stuff that because he seems like a dude who does not take anything very seriously.
No, so dropping to 135 could actually be like indicative of a serious change in how he approaches his career after some ups and downs lately. But until I see that, I kind of have to go off of what I've seen before, and that tells me that Quinonez is a natural pick.
Yeah, Quinonez opened at 180, minus 180, dropped down to minus 214, and is only just in the last few hours rising up to minus 206. And Ishihara opened at plus 147, adjusted up to plus 177, and just recently dropped to plus 169. So, small shift to get closer lately. I don't know if that'll continue, though. I don't see any big reasons for the shift, but Ishihara is always dangerous. Mm-hmm. Brings us to a lightweight bout: Ross Pearson versus Mizuto Hirota.
Like this fight, it makes me a little sad for Ross because Ross Pearson's on a 4-fight losing streak, which is boy. Also, how much does it hurt that he's the only guy in the UFC who hasn't been able to beat Will Brooks? That kind of a heartbreaker. Like, everybody else got to do it. Why not me?
Yeah, no, I mean, if Nick Lentz can, Ross Pearson should too.
Yeah, I mean, he did go to war with Will Brooks. The thing is that Ross Pearson is clearly still good at what he does. He doesn't look like he's lost for ideas or that he can't pull the trigger. He was really competitive with Dan Hooker before getting knocked out. He's been super competitive in all of these fights that he's lost, his last 4. It's just that he doesn't seem to be able to keep up with his opponents anymore, or he just gets caught and it has a much bigger effect on him than it used to earlier in his career. And yes,
and also I think opponents have figured him out in ways that he has not, in ways that, as we pointed out before, he's never figured himself out.
Right. We've always talked about Ross Pearson not knowing that he's at his best boxing off the back foot and sort of playing matador. I think that's what he does exceptionally well. And it should be something I think that he should invest in more in this late stage of his career as some of that speed and explosiveness starts to leave. And he can rely more, fighting that way would allow him to rely more on things like timing and distance that he has built through experience rather than the physical attributes that are fading. but he's never really seemed to figure that out. And granted, somebody like Dan Hooker didn't really give him the chance because Hooker was fighting him from a longer range, kind of compelled Pearson to come forward. So we will see if Ross Pearson can turn that corner here against Mizuto Hirota, because Hirota definitely can fight that kind of fight. He can be an out boxer. He can work behind his jab and counter on the way in, but he doesn't have a gigantic reach advantage like Dan Hooker. He's not really very quick of foot. So Pearson should be able to either maybe pull Hirota after him or spend some time in the pocket here and have some chances. Looking at Hirota's recent performances, though, like Hirota did really well against Alexander Volkanovski. He probably had the best performance against Volkanovski anyone has in the UFC, where he definitely clearly lost that fight, but
yeah,
his toughness that he's always been known for is still there, and there is no quit whatsoever in Mizuto Hirota, and he will continually adapt and try to find new ways of getting his shots in. Plus, he can just take a hell of a shot still, as we saw in that fight. So it's really the physical edge that makes me favor Mizuto Hirota more than it is the stylistic matchup. I think it'll be a pretty closely matched sort of boxing match with both guys getting in nice shots, both guys spending a good amount of time in the pocket. But Hirota looks closer to his prime at this point than Pearson does. So I'm going with Mizuto.
Yeah, I will say, looking even just glancing again at Ross Pearson's record, it does strike me that Mizuto Hirota really does not fight like any of the people that Pearson has lost to lately. You know, Will Brooks, Jorge Masvidal, Stevie Ray, and Dan Hooker are all fighters who are much more willing to play off their back foot and play a counter game that leads to Ross Pearson's worst performances.
Yeah.
Than Hirota is. Hirota can do some of that, but he's usually at his best being a bully and being able to push people forward and, you know, mix in takedowns and mix in quick little flurries and just kind of out hustle people in a grind.
That being said, it's also hard to imagine Hirota spending the entire fight chasing after Pearson like Paul Felder did a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like, both guys are kind of boxer punchers. I think we'll have a lot of back and forth
It's true.
in terms of who's on the front foot and who's moving back.
And so, you know, there's a real avenue there for Pearson to look better in this fight for longer than he has in any recent fight. But it is also really hard to just look at Pearson and his durability, which seems to be an increasing problem, and his inability to figure out opponents at all lately, which seems to be, or figure out himself in terms of opponents, which seems to be a continual problem, and say he's going to beat Mizuto Hirota over 15 minutes and not be the less durable fighter who gets caught at some point or starts to get, you know, pushed around and just outworked and ground down. So I got to take Mizuto Hirota just almost entirely based on toughness and Hirota having a better sense of how he wants to fight in any given moment.
Yeah.
Odds on Hirota, he's actually the underdog at the moment. Shocking to me. Opened at plus 147, dropped to plus 124, is currently at plus 125. Ross Pearson opened at minus 180, adjusted up to minus 145, and currently at minus 151.
That's a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, Pearson is literally, you know, Ross Pearson's most recent wins are Chad Laprise in 2016, which I guess it's not that long ago, and Chad Laprise is all right. And then Paul Felder. I guess it's one of those weird things where, like, Pearson's only recent wins have been pretty decent, and his losses have been to fighters that might all beat Mizuto Hirota. But I still don't. I can't trust that. Like,
is it maybe because there's a lot of like English people in Perth? Maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't see why. I mean, I see it as a close.
Initially set the odds as Pearson with Pearson as a favorite.
Weird, yeah. I mean, I see it as a close fight. I just don't really see the rationale behind I would not expect the bookmakers or the betting public to determine that Ross Pearson is the favorite here.
Yeah. So yeah. If you believe that Pearson may be just totally washed at this point, him being a favorite is an interesting line to look at. Maybe.
I don't think he's totally washed. I just think he's just been figured out.
Yeah, I don't bet. I will continually tell people that. We talk about odds because odds are a great way of gauging public perception of a fight and how everybody else other than us is seeing it. But
it's a way of contextualizing our take on the fight.
Yeah. All right. That brings us to Formiga versus Nguyen and a flyweight bout that should be a really great fight.
Yeah. I'm really excited about this one, actually.
And this is a tough one to me in that I don't know how good Ben Nguyen can be.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know Ben Nguyen is a fantastic athlete. Very clearly a good flyweight athlete. Is he as good an athlete as Ray Borg, Henry Cejudo, Joseph Benavidez, and John Dodson? I don't know. He's certainly not as technically proficient in any one area as any of those fighters are in at least one area. Like, there's no one part of Ben Nguyen's game that looks as good as Ray Borg's grappling does. Or there's no one part of Ben Nguyen's game that looks as good as Henry Cejudo's wrestling does.
Yeah. He's almost there with the striking. Like, he's almost on, like, even stylistically, Ray Borg's crazy transitional grappling. That's the closest parallel, is that Nguyen's striking is like this fluid, constantly moving, transitional thing. But
yeah. But I don't know if that, for Formiga, the problem really is that there's an athletic ceiling. He's a very good but not great athlete. And that the fact that he is not otherwise a power striker basically means that he's relying on being a good but not great athlete against people who can hit harder than him, can out scramble him, or can scramble with him at the very least.
His advantages are all technical.
His advantages are all technical. And I think he's got sizable technical advantages over Ben Nguyen in a few areas. I think it's enough for me to pick him against Nguyen, who, Nguyen is a very good, fun, aggressive striker. He's not a very great defensive striker, though. And in fact, he's just generally not very great defensive anything. Like, there are just holes in his game where if you're throwing strikes at him, his defense isn't great. If you're wrestling him, he can get taken down. If you have the positions in the grappling positions on him, he can be submitted. And these things have all been problems for him over his career, to the point that he got knocked out by Louis Smolka, who is a much lesser athlete than Ben Nguyen. Like, just infinitely lesser athlete, to the point that it's driven Louis Smolka out of the top 15 at flyweight.
Yeah.
The same tone, Nguyen looked great against Elliott. And against a very good athlete who does not have anywhere near the technical depth, John Herrera, Ben Nguyen was able to front run all fight.
He destroyed John Herrera statistically almost exactly in the same way that Luis Smolka destroyed him. In their fight, Smolka hit 82 significant strikes to Nguyen's 4. And against Herrera, Nguyen landed 105 to Herrera's 22. So I think the portrayal of him as like an offensively potent fighter who really relies on scoring offense to control fights is accurate.
For me, Formiga is at a point where he can still do just enough of everything while being one of the rare flyweights who's like a hair off of being an elite athlete and not so far off that it's just immediately like you can't compete in the top 15.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like that seems to be how everybody else gets separated out. It's like you're either unbelievable or you're just out. And Formiga's like the one dude, maybe him and like Dustin Ortiz, maybe or something, or no, him and John Moraga are the two dudes who are like managed to have enough technical parts of their game to hang with all of the really much better athletes.
Yeah, Formiga is the Rafael Sunsao of 125.
Yeah, he can fight going forward. He can box going forward or backwards. He's reasonably defensively sound. You know, he got a bead on Ray Borg's speed and power combination striking all throughout their fight and was able to roll with most of Borg's punches and answer with his own. He's been able to out kickbox other fighters before, and then he's a great grappler and reasonable wrestler behind it. And I think that ability to be defensive and to not be overwhelmed by people who aren't, you know, who are anything other than way more technical than him or way more powerful than him is enough to beat Nguyen. But it could be that Nguyen just comes out and pours it on him and keeps it on him and front runs his way to a win. The big thing being that Formiga is not a dangerous striker and Nguyen is. I'm willing to pick Formiga and take that chance that he can especially get takedowns and then control grappling positions and be the better lockdown grappler in a way that Tim Elliott was not willing to be early.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a thrilling fight for me because if it's a fight, it's a very winnable fight for Nguyen, and it's a fight if he does win it that says he has gone from being a action fighter to a potential title contender in that division.
To a title contender, I would say.
Yeah.
Like beating Jussier Formiga is like beating Brian Bader at light heavyweight. Like,
yeah,
that's your foot in the door right there. Is beating Jussier Formiga is depending on the climate. Whether Johnson Dillashaw happens, you're either one fight away from a title shot or you're there, because that's what this division is. It's just there's not a lot of options. So, yeah, it looks very much to me like a fight where Ben Nguyen has quite a bit of success early, largely because he does push a phenomenal pace.
Mm-hmm.
He lands, according to Fight Metric, about 4.5 strikes per minute, significant strikes per minute, and that's about 43% of what he throws. So he's out there pushing a nice pace. He puts his shots together quite well. A lot of the sort of tricky stance switching mid combination that you see from like Ludwig fighters, where it's cutting angles while throwing your punches, makes him tricky. Formiga is a Nova União fighter to the core, in the sense that he is, above all, an excellent neutralizer. That takedown defense, striking defense, creating distance, and locking people down in positions. Like, his whole game is like, I'm just going to stick you, I'm going to prevent you from hurting me and stick you in a place you don't want to be. And I think that makes it seem like after having a little trouble early, Formiga's going to find a way to neutralize Nguyen, hit a good takedown, teleport to his back, and if he doesn't submit him, then at least hold him down enough on the ground that it takes some of the fire out of Ben 10. So I like Formiga's wrestling and grappling to save him from a potentially dangerous striking exchange in the beginning.
Yeah, it does trouble me a little that Formiga did get just caught into a straight kickboxing match with Ray Borg that he lost.
Yeah.
Because Ray Borg, like, it was basically just Ray Borg being more powerful and landing the bigger shots round to round that won him that fight.
Yeah, but I think that was like in the same way that Rafael Sunsao will lose that fight to TJ Dillashaw every time.
Yeah.
I think it was just that it was just close enough throughout that Formiga never ever was given the impression that he was out of the fight.
Yeah.
And so it never seemed to occur to him like, oh, I need to change the way I'm approaching this. Whereas like against somebody like Uluka Sasaki, a massive frame and everything, it didn't take Formiga long at all to start pressing for takedowns. He knew he needed them. I have a feeling that with the kind of volume Nguyen brings, it's not going to take much to convince Formiga that he needs to start wrestling.
Yeah, that may be a very fair read on it. Formiga opened at -115, adjusted down to -129, and has slowly risen back up to -123. Nguyen opened up at -115, adjusted up to +115. So -115 adjusted to +115, fallen down to -101. So those odds are running nearly dead even. Formiga, a slight favorite. I'm okay with that. I think he could be a bigger favorite, but I really like Ben Nguyen has a serious shot at overperforming here.
Oh, yeah.
I really love his chances behind that aggressive power striking.
Yeah, and he's one of those snowball fighters where like giving him those openings early just might be enough to Formiga can look a little lackadaisical sometimes, a little too unshakable for his own good when it's like, hey, wake up, you need to do something. So,
and there is a thing too where every time Formiga fights like serious top level athletes, and when may be that he is an insanely good. He's a good enough athlete that the fact that he had a really underdeveloped defensive and not very deep technical game for years brought him as far as it did. Like his game is finally snapping together now.
Mm-hmm.
But for a long time, he wasn't that dude. It just was relying on phenomenal athleticism. And, there's a sense that Formiga, every time he fights somebody who's the athletic cream of the crop, falls short.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to see it. He's a favorite, but I'm not shocked it's not a big favorite. All right. That brings us to Jeremy Kennedy versus Alex Volkanovski.
Like this matchup. I have been extremely impressed by what I've seen from Alexander Volkanovski. Jeremy Kennedy's been building a less sort of blow you away resume in the UFC, but he's kind of that challenge for a fighter like Volkanovski that sneaks up on you. Where you're like, you take your initial look at these two names next to each other, and you're like, oh, Volkanovski. And then you look at their fights, and you're like, ooh, I don't know. It's like if they matched Khabib versus Kevin Lee, I'd be like, oh, Khabib. And then I would look at their footage and be like, I don't know, actually, specifically because Kennedy can really hang in the kind of fight that Volkanovski usually turns to when he needs to overwhelm an opponent. Yeah. Right? Like Volkanovski will pressure kickbox with people. He will just force a pace on you, make you react, and nail you with big power shots. But if he needs to control you, if he needs to break you down, if he needs to do what he really does best to beat you, that is his wrestling, and his ground and pound in transitions above all is making you work underneath him on the ground and catching you while you are adjusting to him in just a stable postured position above you. And Kennedy is very strong and very skillful in clinch tie-ups and in wrestling exchanges in general. So the thing is the thing that I think still makes it relatively easy for me to pick Volkanovski here is that Kennedy's striking is a serious work in progress. He managed to outstrike Kyle Bochniak throughout portions of their fight, but it was also clear that he was like reacting on impulse and not calmly making decisions or relying on things that he had drilled to the point where he didn't have to think about them.
Well, Bochniak, as I said, that version of Kyle Bochniak was, is even more limited than the version that we saw just this last fight.
Now that we've seen Super Bochniak, there seriously is a stark contrast between not full camp Bochniak and full camp Bochniak that we saw last time out. He looked much better. And he gave Kennedy problems on the feet because Kennedy was like, he's just kind of guessing a lot of the time. He's not comfortable enough with standing in range or on the end of range with another willing striker to make reads on what they're doing. So it's like, okay, something's coming. I don't know what it is. Something's coming. I'm going to duck or I'm going to counter with a big shot. And That's the kind of stuff that gives Volkanovski an in, because Volkanovski is the polar opposite as a striker. He is extremely well composed. All of the shots he throws, all of the defenses he uses, all lead into something else. His ability to transition smoothly on the ground isn't quite as impressive on the feet, but that instinct is still there. And he flows very well from one shot to another, from one position to another, and of course from his striking to his grappling better than Kennedy does. So better takedown setups, more fluid striking. I have to favor Volkanovski, but if Volkanovski decides to go in there and just tie up with Kennedy and wrestle with him, I think Kennedy's going to have a chance to make it really difficult.
Yeah, Volkanovski's he's very much, along with somebody like Michel Prazeres, weirdly, they're like some of the absolutely best representations of process-driven fighters, like easy to see process-driven fighters. Because, there are fighters who are very process-driven in ways like a Donald Cerrone or Robbie Lawler or something like that, who are very clearly like they're building things and setting things up in ways that will pay off later in the fight. That you don't necessarily, it's harder to see those things as you're watching.
Or these guys are process driven in like a workman-like way.
Yeah, the processes that they work with are so clear that it's like it's the easy way to define what a process-driven fighter is. You see Alex Volkanovski go out there, he moves forward, he pressures, he throws big shots that lead straight into somebody's hips, hits a takedown, finds transition angle or finds angles to cut to better positions, and starts working ground and pound. And it's just everything, every single part leads to something else obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy Kennedy has some of that, but the striking to wrestling part of it is broken.
Yeah.
He is basically only wrestling or only striking. And he does not... His striking looked good regionally when he was fighting on, small shows against poor competition. He would wing shots off his back foot, and the fact that he would just throw with power and just do it while people were coming forward into him led to good things for him. But that striking has immediately become fundamentally broken in the UFC.
Well, that's explained just by a higher level of opposition, I think.
Yeah.
Like Kyle Bochniak wouldn't just run into his shots. And so Kennedy didn't fully know how to make him.
Well, and more than the Bochniak example even was his fight with Hani Jason, where he won every minute of that fight against Jason, except for the 5 seconds per round that it was standing, where he almost got knocked out each 5 seconds.
Which is Hani impressive Jason, in a way, that he won every minute of the fight while losing every striking exchange. It's kind of remarkable.
Stood up, Hani Jason would throw a flying knee or something, and it would, Kennedy would just guess and get clobbered by it. So that portends really poorly against Volkanovski and Volkanovski's ability to step in with power.
Especially how much Kennedy, because he wasn't 100% sure of how those things worked, he spent so much time with his back against the fence.
Yeah.
Against Bochniak.
Because like I said, his regional striking was to back up and throw hooks while he backed up and try to counter with power, but it's not intelligent counters. It's just, I'm just going to start winging shots at somebody and hope they go away, and I hit him really hard.
I hope he fixes that, because otherwise he's going to become featherweight Phil Davis, where there's just I don't know how I can strike okay, and I can wrestle really good, and I don't really know how they go together.
Yeah, I think this is his reckoning point, because I don't think he hasn't had to pay for it yet. That's the biggest thing. True. Is that even with seeing fights not go his way, he's obviously an incredibly confident fighter. You hear him talk outside the cage, and talk about his performances and all that, and I think he just has not had to pay for it.
Yeah, but losing to Volkanovski could turn Jeremy Kennedy into Volkanovski.
Yeah,
because maybe that's the way he should be fighting with his game.
It absolutely should. The only other question at that point would be, if he ends up trying to fight that way, does he actually have the athleticism and durability to fight that way? Because the way he gets cracked is a problem.
True.
And then Volkanovski, the other thing is that both fighters are good scramblers, but the fact that I think Volkanovski is going to be leading with pressure and power, the fact that he's a good scrambler pays off a lot better for him because he doesn't have, like, Kennedy has to reactively shoot in on him. And, you know, even when we saw against Volkanovski against that Shane Young, where like Shane Young was able to hit a couple of reactive takedowns and put Volkanovski on his back. They put him on his back for like half a second. You know, it was like Volkanovski would hit the mat, and I think at one point he like swept and lifted Young up and slammed him. And it's just like Volkanovski's not just a guy who knows how to wrestle going forward. He can wrestle himself through bad spots.
Mm-hmm.
So, two really technical wrestlers, one of whom has a lot more confidence putting his strikes together moving forward. I got to pick Volkanovski here too. Odds on this fight, Volkanovski is a reasonable favorite, open at -210, adjusted up to -174, and then is dropped steadily until the last few hours when it's dropped steeply back down to -204. Jeremy Kennedy opened at +170, adjusted down to +149 or so. Has risen slowly up until the past few hours when it's jumped sharply up to +168. So I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, Kennedy hasn't finished anyone in the UFC, even against guys who are not necessarily on his level in any way. You know, or like guys like Hani Jason and Alessandro Ricci are toughish, but they're not so much that the way he overwhelms people, he should not be getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And like that, if it's just going to be a decision, if both he and Volkanovski are going to go, or if Volkanovski's going to be the more likely finisher in this fight, then it's really hard to see Kennedy's avenue to a decision.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I was kind of when you read the odds thinking like maybe they should be wider.
Yeah,
like, Kennedy strikes me as somebody designed to test the wrestling dominance of Volkanovski. How can he do against somebody who really knows how to wrestle?
Yeah.
But other than that, it doesn't feel, based on what we've seen from him as of now, that he can test him anywhere else. So
no. All right. Up next, Rob Wilkinson, rather. Wrong Wilkinson. Rob Wilkinson versus Israel Adesanya. Might as well just be some guy versus the style bender, honestly.
Yeah.
I hate to say that for Rob, but
I think you just give him his new nickname, Wrong Wilkinson.
Wrong Wilkinson. There you go.
Not the one you want. Yeah.
Wilkinson, he's kind of the classic Australian non-prospect, which I feel terrible saying that, but it's basically like in sort of the way, like it's sort of like how Dan Kelly was the Australian non-prospect, but Dan Kelly actually had like a deep wrestling and judo game to kind of shock people with when, you know, they were like, you know, what's my dad doing here? I haven't seen him in 20 years since we stopped talking to each other, and now he's in the cage fighting me. And then, you know, then he would pull out his redneck judo, and you're like, holy shit, he's actually, you know, a good fighter and not just the living embodiment of all of my daddy issues.
Can we get a buddy cop movie where it's Dan Kelly and Daniel Cormier working together? Because I just realized how much I need that in my life.
Both wearing those like washed out, high-waisted Levi's with like a felt, not a plaid, but like a felt button-up tucked into them.
A felt button-up. I don't even know if I've seen such a thing.
Well, it's like a plaid shirt. It's like the plaid material that you see out of like a plaid material. It's like a felting,
like flannel.
Like flannel, yeah.
Okay,
flannel. There we go.
Don't you guys wear a lot of flannel up where you live?
We do. Whatever. Point being,
Yeah, we don't know about flannel, you know, in the Nirvana town.
I don't have to take this. Anyway, Rob Wilkinson, if you took out the wrestling, if you took out the actual wrestling credentials and and added some actual like mobility to Dan Kelly's game, you would kind of get Rob Wilkinson.
Mm-hmm.
And also like the uncanny ability to know when to throw a strike that Dan Kelly has.
Mm-hmm.
Wilkinson was otherwise, he's the best wrestler on the Aussie circuit regionally, and that really worked for him. And then given somebody like Sierra Bahadurzada, just got whomped on for 2 rounds.
Yep.
And Adesanya is actually legitimately like one of the most fun and interesting and high quality kickboxers in the world. And he's in MMA now. And his takedown defense looks like it's only one level.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a sprawl. Melvin Guillard took him down because he tried to barrel roll out of a single leg. So there are problems that
he first tried to literally run out of the single leg where he backed out and then turned and then just tried to hop away on one foot as fast as he could to free his ankle and then had to roll when he realized it wasn't going to work. Yeah, it wasn't a great look for wrestling.
It wasn't, but the single line of defense has generally been there. The ability to sprawl out of one thing or to, move his hips away. And the fact that he knows how to maintain range as a good kickboxer.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing, is that just knowing how to stay outside means that a lot of, you're not going to be there for a lot of bad double legs, which is all that Rob Wilkinson knows how to do. So, I gotta pick Adesanya versus Messi KO sometime in the first or second.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, shots need to happen from in close. That is a fundamental concept in MMA that you need to that's why you set up your takedowns with strikes, because you need some way to either close the distance or if you're already at a close distance to convince the other guy to stay there and open himself up for the takedown. And being able to manage distance as well as Adesanya does makes it so that you can go a pretty far way in MMA with just a single layer of takedown defense. Because it's like you have this layer and there's nothing behind it, but the takedown's not going to penetrate that layer.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Steve like Wonder Boy, who his wrestling has been a slow build up to the point where now it's pretty decent, but he still gets taken down when guys actually go in and shoot in on him and get after him.
Mm-hmm.
But he for the first couple of years he was in the UFC, he was working basically off a single layer of takedown defense and incredible distance management.
Look at Anderson Silva.
Yeah.
How good was Anderson Silva's actual wrestling in wrestling exchanges? Not great. A lot of the time, it got better, but yeah, so you can actually do pretty well if you can manage your distance. And that is one of Israel Adesanya's strengths as a kickboxer, is that he has an excellent command of space. He seems to just know his reach almost intrinsically. He's got a really creative way of putting his strikes together. He reminds me of Andy Ristier, the guy who knocked out Giorgio Petrosian shockingly and then vanished, but mixed with more of an American slick boxer's approach, where you have these weird mid-combination stance switches. It's very difficult to judge where he's going with one strike as he moves, but he's also a little lighter on his feet than a guy like Ristier, a little more willing to kind of play games and make you chase after him. So, yeah, it seems they're setting him up to win, so he's probably going to win.
The only thing here is the odds are kind of weirdly close. Not that close, but they opened at -295. They're trending steadily outward, but they're at -355 at the moment. Wilkinson at +230 and trending upwards to +280. And this feels more like a ±500 kind of fight, frankly. I mean,
I'm still a little too worried about Adesanya's only meaningful win was the Melvin Guillard, and it's 2017 Melvin Gillard. So there's still something like I still don't know enough about how he responds to like genuine grappling skill that I think Rob Wilkinson can probably grapple well enough to maybe test that. I don't know. I'm not confident saying like is Adesanya should be a massive favorite.
Maybe, but I mean, some guy named Alexander Popek and Jamie Abdallah are the best dudes on Wilkinson's record. You know, a German fighter and who has fought only cans, and a
it's not the names on Wilkinson's record that give me any pause picking Adesanya here. It's the 6 submission wins. Where I'm like, I saw Melvin Gillard get a takedown on Israel Adesanya, and I saw Adesanya immediately give up his back when his initial sprawl didn't work. I'm like, there's an opening there for somebody who hunts the rear naked choke,
There is. But Wilkinson's not even as good an athlete as late stage Melvin Gillard.
No.
So,
but you never know. I don't know.
You never know. It's true. You never know. Wilkinson could do it. I'm just the odds. Like, I would not be surprised to see them keep trending outward in a hurry as fight night occurs. It gets closer,
But they are already past the point where I would actually bet on this fight. Okay. I think so.
That's fair enough. That's fair. I don't bet. So to me, I'm just like, really? I mean, he's still the biggest favorite on this card, but it feels like a bigger favorite line than a smaller favorite line than it could be. All right. That brings us to Damien Brown versus Dong Hyung Maestro Kim, and you are up.
This will probably be a barn burner. That it is like another pointless barn burner is not lost on me that this is our featured prelim. Although I will say, like, I criticized, I think, was it Jacare Brunson too? I criticized, Bobby Green, Eric Koch. I was like, why is this the featured prelim over some? And that was actually a really fun fight. So I'm not too inclined to question this choice. I know that it will be fun because Damien Brown and Dong Hyun Kim don't really know any other way but to throw down. Although that being said, we have seen some variety from Maestro Kim more recently. He, not in a way that really makes me feel good about where his game is going is the weird thing. Like he used a lot of his judo, his wrestling. I'll call it wrestling. His background is judo, but he did a lot of clinch tie-ups, a lot of takedown attempts, and some top control against Brendan O'Reilly. But he didn't really seem that good at it. He didn't seem that comfortable actually getting his takedowns, where he kind of just kept pushing the same throws over and over. And once O'Reilly caught on to them, it was like, where's Kim's judo? Where's the, okay, I get you to react to this thing. Here's the move that capitalizes on that reaction. Where are the layers that I expect from a judoka or a wrestler? And they weren't really there. And so instead of like a well-rounded performance, he ended up just kind of looking flat. And then he knocked out Takanori Gomi, which means nothing.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So I am inclined to pick Damien Brown here because I think Damien Brown feels like the fighter with many more options. I think he's significantly faster than Dong Hyun Kim, especially with his hands. Damien Brown's never been super quick on his feet per se.
Yeah,
but
not foot speed at all. Dude is a glacier with his feet.
But lightning quick hands. He throws really rapid fire combinations. Seems to pack some decent power. And unless you are shocking him as he's running forward, a la Vince Pichel, he can take a good shot as well. Vince Pichel just caught him running in with an uppercut, which, like, if a shot's going to surprise you and knock you out, it's probably going to be an uppercut you duck into while running forward. Other than that, 3-round war with Frank Camacho, in which Damien Brown had a case for winning that fight. So if what we're looking at here is mostly a stand-up war with some clinch engagements mixed in, I have more confidence in Brown's wrestling and grappling than I do Kim's, especially because like Kim's actual ground game has never looked very good. I remember when he first got signed to the UFC and I watched his pre-UFC fights and I was like, what is he doing on the ground? He just sort of lays on his back. It doesn't seem to have any ideas.
Well, Brown there's something we've discussed this before. There's something in the water in Korea that just makes it so that like all the defensive parts of the brain get turned off because he's not terrible offensively.
No.
But defensively in any position is just like I don't.
Yeah, it's like a super version of a Sambo fighter where like you just absolutely zero guard game and a like sprinting top game. So I like Damien Brown. I think better submission grappling in all positions, more flexible on the ground. Probably a better takedown artist. Maybe just marginally, but especially a faster handed striker with more creativity to his combinations. I think probably an equally good chin as Maestro Kim and a better gas tank. So I think Damien Brown is going to come out on top after a really, really messy and exciting first round.
I have this feeling that Dong Young Kim is going to just hold Damien Brown against the fence and just kind of like grind him for a 15-minute win just because he's the better athlete.
Yeah, I don't think he can because he had such a hard time doing that to Brandon O'Reilly. And O'Reilly kept clinching with him like willingly. And O'Reilly is not to be disrespectful, but is he's pretty much at the bottom of the rung of how good you have to be as a fighter to be in the UFC.
Well, I mean, he got through on a bad, tough season. He wasn't even that on that rung, quite frankly.
Yeah, so he's not really UFC caliber, and Kim couldn't really dominate him with an approach that was like solely built on. He also gassed himself out doing that. Like he kept tying up with O'Reilly and then got exhausted.
It's true. You know, I think you've slowly swayed me to pick Damien Brown here because I was just worried that Kim might just be able to like stick him on the fence and wear on him with this ugly game that. Because the other problem with Brown in his game, and this is why you can go back and you see he's got a ton of losses to just random dudes, is that not only is he's got fast hands, shockingly fast hands, and good power in those hands, but not only is he foot slow, but he's also transitionally slow in ways that you don't think he would be on the ground. But like you could see it against Frank Camacho even. Like they'd get a scramble going, and you would think like, oh, Damien Brown, like he's got a good position, he's got this, and then suddenly Camacho would just like reverse it and be able to just move a step faster than Brown on the ground. And that has consistently been a problem for Brown in his MMA career, is that he'll get guys tied up on the ground into these scrambles, and then suddenly the fact that he's just not a very fast athlete starts to bite him. He can't transition as fast as his opponent can.
Yeah.
But Kim's terrible defensive grappling makes that not a great proposition for Kim to really shine in those kinds of transitions. So,
I mean, is Kim a better grappler in any sense than Frank Camacho even?
No, probably not.
Right? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. Brown was in that fight. I mean, it can happen. The thing is that to stop Kim from controlling him in that way, Brown still basically the options available to him are to fight a Maestro Kim kind of fight.
Yeah, so, to have a firefight brawl where volume and select power shots win the day while both men throw defense out the window.
Yeah, and obviously it makes it really difficult to be confident about either of these guys, but
yeah, I'll side with you and take Brown, that he's got a little bit more ability to potentially change it up, get a takedown, work some grappling here and there, and maybe have just a bit craftier striking on the feet. But it's a tough fight to pick. You've swayed me, and every time you sway me, that means that I've made the wrong decision. So
didn't I have a good swaying for last week's card?
Did you?
I thought I may have. Patrick over Hadjovic. Did I convince you on that one? Oh, wait, no. I failed to convince you on Alcantara over Soto.
Yeah.
Missed opportunity, Zane. Missed opportunity.
Opportunity.
We know that had I swayed you, the fight would have gone the other way.
There we go. All right. Odds on that fight. Damien Brown is the underdog, opened at plus 115, jumped up to plus 130, and is slowly falling down to plus 120 now. And Dong Young Kim opened up at plus 145, dropped down to plus one or minus one. Opened up minus 145, dropped down to minus 155 or so, panned out at minus 158, and has been rising steadily back up to minus 145. I think these odds, the closer they get to even, the more right they'll be.
Sure.
All right. That brings us to the pay-per-view card and a fight that would be indistinguishable from any of the prelims, Tyson Pedro versus Saparbek Safarov.
What a pay-per-view card it is.
Yeah, this is me. This is like what was that recent Khalil Roundtree versus Michael Alexejek fight recently, where it's like this is just a test of how smart you fight, and Khalil Roundtree just failed it brutally.
Yeah,
that is this fight for Tyson Pedro. Like, you've got a dude who pushes a hellacious pace for light heavyweight. That's really like the big thing in Safarov's corner, is that he just comes out and he swings and he swings and he swings. He is a bad athlete. He looks like he fights like one of those big inflatable tube mans out in front of a car dealership.
Safarov's appearance really goes a long way towards selling the insanity of his fighting style. Like, it does look like he's just been woken up from a nap in an alley every time he's fighting. He's like bleary-eyed. I love him, man. Like, he
looks like the surprisingly dangerous serial killer that's just been pulled out of prison, but it's always like, it's like the like kind of grimy, like balding, unkempt, doesn't look physically fit in any way, but is secretly holding an ice pick that he'll stab in through your ear and then eat part of your face.
Yeah, like, he looks like Frank Sabatka's unsuccessful brother. Yeah, he's got did we ever do Safarov Volante on the Depressed Us?
I don't think we have yet. If we have not,
it ended the second round, which is the only reason I could think of why we have.
I think that's the only reason we haven't done it, but we might have to do it as a good bad fight at some point, because
that is an absurd fight. Anyone who hasn't seen it, go watch it now, because it's not good, but you will thank us for having seen it because it's ridiculous. Anyway.
So yeah, Safarov, the big thing for Pedro is that he only tends to throw one power strike at a time. He does a good job setting them up. He feints well. He's fast. He is obviously athletic. But he only throws one shot at a time. And his counter-striking is really spotty. Like, it's the same kind of like, if he's, it's sort of like he's a better leading fighter than Teruto Ishihara, but his counter striking has the same problem, where it's like he's either found the perfect counter that is going to land and be devastating, or he's just kind of shelling and getting pushed back and getting hit.
Yeah.
So with Safarov, like, it's just going to be, for Pedro, it's just a test of finding your right counters and setting up your strikes well, because you've got a guy who's not as athletic as you, who is not as technical as you, who can be knocked out, but is a wild man and will stay in your face and just keep pouring volume on you until something bad happens. So I got to pick Tyson Pedro in this fight, but these are good tests for young fighters to face, because it's like, this is a legit problem you have to deal with. This is somebody who won't respect you in any way, shape, or form. And, Pedro faced a much more technical fighter that wouldn't respect him in Ilir Latifi at a much slower pace and lost that fight. So,
yeah. You know how in like fighting games, like Street Fighter, Tekken, you can do like training to practice your skills. And in the training, you can like turn off certain aspects of the opponent. This is like if you went into training and you turned off like pain receptors and fear. But
maybe any havoc physics or anything like that. So like,
yeah.
They were like, something gets stuck in a spot and the whole graphics game just like glitches really quick and everything starts wiggling around really fast.
Yeah, Saparbek Safarov missed an opportunity when he did not make his official nickname the Ragdoll, because he is a fighter on Ragdoll physics. Yeah, I quite like this matchup for that reason. That it's like, you know, Tyson Pedro, okay, we saw your ceiling against Latifi. You know, like, now let's continue seeing how you can develop. And here is a guy who, the thing is like Safarov won't even, I'm not correcting you, but I want to like sort of recharacterize. You said that he'll stay in your face. He can't even really do that because he's not technically good enough. Like,
that's true.
He can't, like, he's not going to like keep the pressure on and keep chipping away and like working his way in.
No, he'll just keep swinging big wild hooks every time you're within range to swing a wild hook at you.
Yeah, in like wild bursts. He is like it's a similar kind of matchup to like when I picked Alex Nicholson over Devin Clark, because I was like, this guy's kind of nuts and doesn't seem to know what fear is, and that's like genuinely a difficult challenge for a young, inexperienced fighter. It does feel really hard not to pick Tyson Pedro because he is an athlete, and Safarov looks like a 90-year-old man. Like, he is not athletic at all.
No, he looks like a young man in an old man costume. What do
he is. Safarov is like a handsome 20-year-old, and this is just his makeup for when he fights. Yeah, you know, he looks like a disgruntled orc, but he, you know, like, he's crazy enough and wild enough that like Tyson Pedro really, really needs to watch his P's and Q's. So could go either way, because I still don't feel like I know a ton about how Tyson Pedro responds to pressure and back and forth fights. He's experienced very, very little that resembles that, but he is like the guy with a future as a fighter in this matchup. So it's Tyson Pedro.
You're picking Tyson Pedro, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Much as I would love to pick Saparbek. I mean, you know me, Zane. You know how much
I know. If you could, you would.
Absolutely. If it made any sense at all, I would do it.
Pedro opened at -215, adjusted down to -245, and is currently sliding slowly out, now at -283. Safarov opened at +165 and has just risen steadily to +227.
What if it just crushes Tyson Pedro's composure? What if it just like crushes his will when Bruce Buffer calls out their names, and before his name is called, he learns that Saparbek Safarov is only 31, and he's like, in 5 years I could look like that. This could be me. And what if that just crushes him and he can't fight up to his potential? And it's possible. You never know.
You never know. It's true.
That's why we're here, to point out these possibilities.
That brings us to a lightweight bout that we're looking for, or welterweight bout that we're looking forward to. Jake Matthews, Li Jingliang, and as is only fitting, you get to lead this.
Yeah, and it's not an easy one to call. You know, like, Jake Matthews' well-roundedness and the fact that he embraces being a well-rounded fighter, it makes this kind of iffy, because Matthews is, I think, a markedly better athlete than Li Jingliang in terms of speed and explosiveness. He covers distance very quickly. He transitions on the ground very quickly. He does not have anything like Li Jingliang's boxing skill, especially boxing in the pocket. But you know, the way he mixes things together, the way that he will sort of lunge forward into a takedown off the threat of a strike. These are the kinds of approaches that give Li Jingliang trouble in the early going in a lot of his fights, when he just faces a very Jingliang always needs to like get a feel for the fight. He's kind of a slow starter. He often has to get hurt, not just hit, but hurt before he kind of wakes up. And he often gets like out-grappled before he wakes up. And Matthews is dangerous enough in all of those phases that he could really, like, I wouldn't be shocked if Jake Matthews submitted Li Jingliang in the first round, for example, if he quickly got his back and submitted him. After that point, I start to favor the excellent reading ability of Li Jingliang over Jake Matthews. I think he
leads at a grade 9 level.
Yeah, I mean, for somebody his age, that's pretty good. Yeah, I think I think that his reading ability. Li Jingliang has far too many gold stars in English class for Jake Matthews to compete with him. But I think like Matthews is still really relies on that sort of innate athletic ability. He sort of relies on being able to just sort of power his way through into positions. And Li Jingliang figures that kind of shit out, especially on the feet. He does a great job of forcing you to react in ways he wants you to react with his jabs, with his low kicks, and then inching his way into range where he can pick off some really, really nice counter shots or fight effectively coming forward as the boxer. And let's not forget, like he can hold his own on the ground. I know his only loss in the UFC was that submission to, was it Nakamura?
Yeah, Keitara.
Yeah. Keita Nakamura submitted him, but earlier in his MMA career, Li Jingliang was a grappler, and he can't handle himself on the ground. He just got
clinging grappler. That's why he's nicknamed the Leech.
Yeah. He just got caught by a really good opportunistic submission artist. So
by one of the best back takers in MMA.
Absolutely.
MMA.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm not under the impression either that Matthews down the stretch is going to have a strong grappling advantage over Li Jingliang. I just think this looks like a fight where Matthews has the chances early, and so long as the Leech can survive that, he is going to edge it out more and more as the fight goes on. So I'm going with the Leech by decision.
So apparently one thing that's interesting, and I don't know how much to make of this either way, is that they're talking about Matthews apparently had hip surgery going into his fight with Bojan Velichkovic. Like that was his first fight back from hip surgery where he had like bone shaved off of his hip.
Weird.
Yeah.
For a 23-year-old.
Yeah. Which is an interesting, I don't know what that means going forward. I don't know if that's, but the big thing, it's hard for me, the big reason that brings me a question is like, was that something that was inhibiting him in the past? Like all throughout his early career and his development?
Mm-hmm.
Or is that a worry going forward of like, do you have like a physical problem that's going to be a constant physical problem? Because things like your hips, that's kind of a big fucking deal in MMA.
Hips are fairly important for most athletic activities.
Yeah. It's really hard for me to look at his loss to Andrew Holbrook and be like, yeah, this dude has it to beat Li Jingliang. And the big reason is that Matthews only fights on straight lines. And that was not something that was any different against Bojan Velichkovic. And that's a lot of the reason that fight against Velichkovic, who is much less explosive or dynamic, ended up being razor thin. And that Matthews ended up mostly relying on just kind of holding Velichkovic down. Is that Matthews, when he strikes, he just comes in straight ahead, winging power at one speed. It's kind of like if Dennis Bermudez didn't have a really technical wrestling game or a really high striking output.
Or if like Tyron Woodley wasn't as athletically impressive as he is. Like that's the thing is like to make that level of I'm just rushing you to make that approach work, you need to be really, really fast.
Yeah.
Where the other guy has no choice but to just instinctively react to what you're doing. And Matthews isn't quite that good of an athlete.
No, when, like the guys that he's been able to beat with that game are mostly pretty underwhelming athletes.
Talk shit. Do not talk shit about my boy Akbar Areola, Zane. I know you want to.
Well, I mean, I was mostly going to talk shit about Deshaun Johnson, but,
Don't do that
who wasn't actually a bad athlete, but just a terrible MMA fighter by all standards.
Yeah, but an okay journeyman boxer.
Anybody who's been able to read that, like, that entry, that bull rush that he has beat him. I mean, James Vick choked him out for it. And mostly hurt him and choked him just because he kept coming in these straight, predictable lines. Kevin Lee just beasted him. And then Holbrook. And, like, the Holbrook one is just... Like, Holbrook is really only a chinny, reasonably athletic, offensive grappler.
Yeah.
And for somebody like Jingliang, who is, generally very hard to out-grapple, or hard to out-grapple for any stretch, and who has a great chin, and who gets reads on people and learns over time how to keep space, how to time them and create the space that keeps them upright, and can even hit his own takedowns, because Jake Matthews' counter wrestling is not any great strength of his.
Good point.
It's hard for me to see Matthews winning this. Mostly Matthews, I know he's spent some time at Jackson Wink and stuff like that, but mostly being based out of that Accelerate training center under his dad. Yeah. It seems like a Jordan Means situation. People are going to be like, oh, he's got all the potential in the world, and they're still going to be saying that about Matthews 5 years from now.
I think people often are too attached to the idea of changing camp the moment some kind of trouble starts to rise. Fans recommend this shit constantly to fighters. We're like, oh, you lost, time for a camp change. But the reason that is such a common thing is because it's often one of those realizations a fighter has to make. Compare Sage Northcutt pre-Team Alpha Male to his last fight. And there is no comparison. He looked so much more like a professional fighter because he made a serious change to his training circumstances. And I think Jake Matthews definitely has the potential to turn the corner in a similar way, but it does feel like he really needs to step up the training, go somewhere where he can work with other high-level fighters to actually reach that point. And until then, I think guys like Li Jingliang are going to beat him.
Yeah, it's just, there's still training pics of him in his gym, regional MMA gyms that are, without any other high-level talent around. And if that's still what he's doing, then I don't see a corner about to be turned.
Yeah.
And without that, he could end up being somebody like OSP, where it's just you're a very good athlete, and that will always keep you in a lot of fights, but you've never really gotten to be a better fighter.
Or Michael McDonald, where it's once elite fighters have kind of figured out what your shortcomings are, it's well, you don't really feel like an elite fighter anymore. All of a sudden, it's you're done.
Yeah, because Michael McDonald's a great athlete, and looked like he was going to develop into being a world beater, and just has never really changed functionally.
Yep.
Odds on this fight: Li Jingliang opens as the favorite. Opened at -170, adjusted down to -207, and has jumped up just recently to -163. Kind of surprising odds shift there. Matthews opened at +130, adjusted up and down to +166, and was riding that until just recently, now down to +136. So I'm not sure why those odds are suddenly jumping closer and there's money coming in on Matthews, but I would have to see. He's got avenues to win, especially early. Jingliang's a slow starter, but the dude who squeaks by Bojan Velichkovic and loses to Andrew Holbrook is not a dude I see beating Li Jingliang.
And Matthews is Holbrook's only more or less uncontroversial win, and he's lost every other fight, including the very controversial split over Ramsey Nijem. So it's not a good look.
That brings us to a heavyweight bout, Tai Tuivasa, Cyril Asker. And much like every fight of Tai Tuivasa's immediate career, the question will always be, is the dude he's fighting good enough to make him pay for all the stupid shit he does? That's basically the question. The answer here is probably no. Cyril Asker, unlike Rashad Coulter, who I picked over Tai Tuivasa just because Tuivasa's level of competition and way of fighting is so poor. Cyril Asker does actually have the right approach to fights and to fighting somebody like Tuivasa. He's going to go out, throw a couple of big power hooks, and then dive in on his legs and try to take him down at all costs. It's pretty much a guarantee of the Cyril Asker fight approach here.
I think there's nothing wrong at all with Cyril Asker's approach. Like, I think he's a good fighter who just doesn't happen to really be a standout athlete in a division where that kind of thing really counts.
Exactly. He's not a standout athlete. He will almost certainly take Tuivasa down immediately. If he doesn't take Tuivasa down immediately, Tuivasa will grab him and drag him on top of him just for the fun of it.
Yep.
He did to Coulter. Coulter wouldn't take him down, so Tuivasa like grabbed an arm, swept his own feet out from under him, and just like grabbed Coulter on top of him, and then had to fight his way back to his feet.
Yep. Inexperience. That's all that is.
Yeah, he does some remarkably bad things in the cage, but he is incredibly light on his feet for a man his size. Appeared to actually be able, even in that short fight against Coulter, appeared to be able to manage his energy a lot better.
I thought you were going to say appeared to actually be able to fly when he got his 300-pound bulk off the ground in an instant for that flying knee.
No, I mean he's amazingly dynamic. He appears to be he appeared to manage his energy a little better because he looked gassed in like 2 minutes against James McSweeney, and he hits like a fucking truck. And Cyril Asker's head is huge, and he is not a actually good control wrestler. He's a willing wrestler. He's willing to go out and try to put a grind on people, but trying to hurt people in that usually means he lets them up. Like, there's a reason Yao Zhonghu made it to the second round against Cyril Asker, and it's because Asker couldn't hold him down very easily. And against somebody who's infinitely more explosive than Yao Zhonghu and much more dynamic with his offense, I gotta pick Tuivasa here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much to add. It is a fight that is clearly designed for Tuivasa to win. Asker is a process-driven, well put together fighter, but sorry, I have a cat situation over here. But yeah, I mean, Tuivasa is being set up here to win, and it is also hopefully a test of his decision-making ability. He is gaining experience, and those kinds of things you pointed to, like pulling people on top of you because you're going for a foot sweep that you clearly don't really know how to do, or especially how to set up, then that is very much a result of inexperience. Somebody who has just not been taught about, what's a high risk, has not learned through punishment the nature of risk and reward in the fight game. So
sacrifice foot sweeps in MMA, not a good idea, people. Unless
not
you're
generally
expert judoka or Greco-Roman wrestler who has practiced years of how to like kick somebody's foot out, pull them, and then turn them as they fall. Unless you're Daniel Cormier out there, the sacrifice foot sweep is not a good idea.
Yeah, if it's your UFC debut and you're not a wrestler, don't try to lateral drop the guy in the opening seconds, and they're not even supposed to be like the things that Tuivasa was getting punished for weren't even supposed to be sacrifice foot sweeps. They're just supposed to be like a Thai judo style foot block that he didn't know how to maintain his balance when he did it, so he just yanks someone on top of him. Yeah.
All right. Tuivasa is the favorite. Pretty sizably, opened at -190, adjusted down to -304, is currently at -300. Odds really haven't changed at all. Asker opened at +150, adjusted up to +234, currently at +239. Little wide because Tuivasa makes mistakes, but frankly, he should melt Cyril Asker at some point.
Yeah, and it probably won't take that long.
No. That brings us to the co-main event, which, man, that feels like it came up fast. Mark Hunt, Curtis Blaydes. Connor, take us away.
Sorry, I'm casting my cat aside. I just want people to know that is a sort of coal pit over to my left.
Yeah,
so there was no safe landing for that cat. Yeah, I like this matchup. This would be a perfectly enticing part of a main card that was not otherwise composed of Tai Tuivasa versus Cyril Asker and Tyson Pedro versus Saparbek fucking Safarov. Curtis Blaydes is now, especially now that Francis Ngannou has been relegated back to the conveyor belt, is like the promising heavyweight up and comer. He's he gave Ngannou his toughest fight up to the loss to Miocic, and has continued to make strides. I think people probably don't understand how dramatic the changes Curtis Blaydes' game have undergone are. People were really, really down on him for that Daniel Omielanchuk fight, and I was nothing but impressed. And it's because, like, here's Curtis.
We saw the proof of the pudding in his next fight against Alexei Oleinik, where he was able to do a lot of the same straight ones, twos, kickboxing.
Yeah.
And then chain his double legs in ways that were not fluid at all against Omielanchuk.
Yeah, it was his first fight against a southpaw. He said he hadn't done much training against southpaws. It was very clear that he was not sure how to set up takedowns, above all, against a southpaw. He did not know how to go into his usual double leg from there. But he also, in his like 8th fight, outstruck Daniel Omielanchuk. He beat him without being able to take him down. And like, that's pretty impressive to me. This is a guy who, when he first came into the UFC, didn't really know how to box. Could really just jab and hit you with a takedown. And all his fights up to that point had been him just overpowering and smashing people on the ground. So that is a pretty rapid development for Curtis Blaydes. And I think that speaks a lot to his potential, probably also to his work ethic and how well he thinks about the game, that he is able to absorb information and put it to use shockingly quickly.
It also speaks well of what Elevation Fight Team is doing with people when you see like him and who's that guy on the opening of the other recent card?
That's right. Hold on,
Corey Sandhagen.
Yes.
Who look, who are playing this who was playing this very aggressive, sort of flashy, fun combination striking game with lots of body work. And you see what Curtis Blaydes is doing and adding to his game. And it says a lot about what that team is adding in terms of quick layers to people's striking games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing that really stands out to me right now about Curtis Blaydes. We know that he's heavy as hell and very strong from top position, that he doesn't seem to quite know yet how to let the other guy move or to posture up and land really damaging loaded up shots from those positions. But he's like a Brock Lesnar type of person when he's on top of you, where you're just in pain carrying his weight all the time. And now as a striker, we are seeing him pretty quickly understand the ins and outs of a whole new set of moves, where he knows that he's got to defend himself after he strikes. He knows he's got to set things up with his jab. He knows how to feint. He knows how to take an angle after landing a combination. It's just a matter of making these things natural enough to the point that he doesn't have to think about them anymore and that he's just flowing. And I don't think until I see it, I don't know that he's there yet against a guy like Mark Hunt. Like, what he showed against Daniel Omielanchuk is undeniably impressive. Mark Hunt is worlds beyond Daniel Omielanchuk in terms of both depth of skill, power, speed with his hands in particular. Like, Mark Hunt is just a whole nother ball game. And if you're a little iffy about how to set up your takedowns against Mark Hunt, you're probably not going to get him. You've got to get him exchanging and hit his legs while he's throwing to consistently take him down. You have to do what Miocic did to him. You have to do what Lesnar did to him, is get him to commit and then take his leg. And that was the thing that Curtis Blaydes really struggled with in his last 2 fights, was having enough confidence in his still developing striking to use it to create an exchange in which he could find his takedown.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't set those shots up, then Mark Hunt has very good first level takedown defense. That first layer is incredibly strong, and he's got a very difficult build to take down, which helps him a lot too. And then otherwise, you're in a striking match with Mark Hunt, who has very fast hands and hits really hard, and is not only very difficult to hit clean, but is still very difficult to hurt unless you are an elite heavyweight. So I am going to pick Mark Hunt. I would not be shocked if Curtis Blaydes turns a corner and wins here, especially because we have seen Mark Hunt look flat a lot of the time. But I also saw a picture of Mark Hunt looking like he weighs less than me. So for this camp, and that's usually a good sign when it comes to Mark Hunt, that he is taking this very seriously. So a serious Mark Hunt against a still developing Curtis Blaydes. I got to pick Mark Hunt.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing we've seen with Hunt lately, the biggest development, other than his chin starting to crack in small ways and becoming a normal heavyweight chin rather than a ungodly heavyweight chin.
Yeah.
The biggest thing we've seen from Mark Hunt is honestly it's the subtraction of next level speed, where it used to be that, you know, everything came pretty fast, and then every now and then something came way faster than anything else. And
just like Roy Nelson early in his career, where it was like that sudden burst of speed that really made him dangerous.
Yeah. And Mark Hunt doesn't have that anymore. He no longer, like, if you watch his fight with Derek Lewis, it's him technically out kickboxing Derek Lewis, but doing it all at basically the same single speed. Like, he's picking all of his shots well, he's moving around, he's getting into the pocket well, he's timing everything, but he's not setting Derek Lewis up for like an uppercut that you're just like, holy shit, that was fast.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he still was changing speed nicely in that fight. He was still playing with his rhythm, but
it doesn't, like, you watch old Mark Hunt highlights and you see the speed difference in a way that you're like, it is unreal how fast he used to be.
Yeah, he's still changing gears. It's just that he's slowly losing the upper gears as time goes on.
But the thing is that you then still have to be a better kickboxer than Mark Hunt, and the other part of this is Curtis Blaydes too. In his fight, we saw it with Oleinik, and this is still a part of his game that needs to develop. Is he got takedowns on Oleinik over and over, but he had to get them over and over because every time that he tried to posture up to do damage, and he wanted to, he quickly shifted into like, okay, I'm going to now throw ground and pound. He let Oleinik up immediately. Like, he has not learned how to use his weight to hold people down who can scramble. And
I think he had it better earlier in his career. It's like now he realizes he can posture up. And it's just like growing pains.
Yeah, he's had to tear down a lot of the basics of his old game to learn a new game that is a more fully fledged MMA style.
Yes, for sure.
And Hunt is pretty reasonably good at scrambling back to his feet. He's hard to hold down unless you really can, wear him out. And, like I say, other than that, you have to be a better kickboxer still than Mark Hunt. You have to be able to do the kind, do what Alistair Overeem did, do what Stipe Miocic did, hit that flying knee like Fabricio Verdum did, because Fabricio Verdum still lost the first round of that fight with Mark Hunt, like on a couple of weeks training and like way out of shape in Mexico City. Or do what Junior Dos Santos did. And unless you can do that, unless you can actually put together a technical kickboxing performance, you're talking Brock Lesnar, like actually just holding him, being able to like really put weight on him.
Yep.
And Curtis Blaydes just does not seem there yet. He could be there in like a couple of years. I could absolutely see picking Blaydes over Hunt. But right now, the technical striking is it's too wooden. There's not enough power behind it. It's too reactionary to what his opponents like. Oleinik still hit him a lot and got him swinging just in the pocket, like trying to fend him off. Stuff like that, where Hunt can keep range well and pick his moments and pick his shots and pick his setups and feints to draw out ugly parts of Blaydes' striking game, make him pay for those. So,
well, picking Hunt. Go on.
As I say, if Blaydes continues to improve the way he has, we are seeing him improve. We are clearly seeing the technical jumps. If he's made those, asserted more wrestling into his striking and improved his top game, that alone could be enough to beat Mark Hunt. He certainly has the size and power to make that happen. But without seeing him let a Leineck up over and over again in that fight doesn't give me the confidence in that immediately.
Yeah, I think Blaydes could be there in like a year or two. He could be at that level, like not very long. It's really at this point, what it would take to beat Mark Hunt is the understanding of one's own game to take pieces out. You know, to be like, to do what Brock Lesnar did. Like Curtis Blaydes has the tools to jab Mark Hunt, just interrupt him, use your frame to keep him away, and then tie him up anytime he tries to commit. But that takes serious resolve and a commitment to a strategy using a select part of your whole skill set. And I just don't think Blaydes has the experience to have that kind of self-control yet. You know?
Hunt is not as easy to control as Daniel Omalanchik was. And that's all there is to it, really. And maybe Blaydes can do it. If he does, it's a great feather in his cap. It shows that he's continuing to develop at a great pace. He's only 26, but until I see it, I can't trust it. Mark Hunt is the underdog, however. Opened at -120, adjusted up to +155, and is currently at +137, pretty much just running even, or running unchanged there. Blaydes opened at -120, adjusted down to -190, and is now at -165. I say those lines are pretty much running flat at this point.
I'm a little surprised. Blaydes is the favorite.
I'm a little surprised too. Because that Hunt looked really, really fine, like good and solid in his win over, oh, damn it.
Derek Lewis.
Yeah, Derek Lewis.
Yeah, and Blaydes looked more than a little shaky in both of his last two fights. Like, definitely still looked like a work in progress.
That brings us to the main event, Yoel Romero, Luke Rockhold. And this is a fascinating fight. They fight, like Phil McKenzie put it out on Twitter, this is one of the like all-time great athlete fights in MMA, frankly, we're seeing. You know,
I mean, with that.
Yoel Romero and Luke Rockhold are both way at the elite end of athleticism in MMA. I mean, and for Rockhold especially, that's been almost a crutch. Romero, he's turned being a great athlete into being this sort of, you know, what we've described as this sort of ethereal, any technique at any time fighter.
Yeah.
Rockhold has used it like, well, I may not be a very good kickboxer, but I can kick really hard and fast. So I'm going to throw a lot of those, and I can fall back and just throw a really wide hook that'll slap you at an angle you don't expect. And that's, you know, that's enough until you tangle with me and I'm just way faster and stronger than you on the ground.
Yeah, and incredibly skillful. Like, let's not.
And incredibly skillful on the ground. He's a very skillful grappler.
Yeah, both of these guys have insane grappling skills. Both of them have, in different ways, been able to get by with like underdeveloped striking skills because they are so athletically gifted. Yeah.
The big thing here, honestly, is that I'm glad that Luke Rockhold is like taking steps to improve his striking game, but I think it's too late. And I did not like anything I saw out of his fight with Dave Branch. He looked like a fighter even more tentative than normal about how he should strike. On his back foot, just like fading away, still trying to find his body kicks and long straight punches, but without any of the resolve and like fearsomeness that made that a big problem for people.
Yeah, it had the look of a sort of transitional fight in some respects, where it's often when somebody gets a new trainer that and has their style like fundamentally changed. But the worrying thing was that Rockhold came out like it almost looked as if he was shocked that his new skills weren't there for him. that he wasn't suddenly a much, much better boxer, because Branch just like, it's like Rockhold came in expecting David Branch to also respect the changes Rockhold had made, and Branch just didn't care. And Rockhold had to seriously, like, he had to have his bell rung and had to be woken up before he was like, oh, I should do Luke Rockhold things now.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's hard to know where he's at.
Yeah. And it's hard for me to trust that those changes that he's making are going to click at this point, because he spent a decade fighting the way he fights. And until, like, how long is it going to take to instill new rhythms and new triggers where you don't just fall back onto your same old things in a firefight, except now you might fall back on them and think, wait, I'm doing the wrong thing. Yeah. This is not what I'm supposed to, because, you know, before it was like, oh, I'm going to, like, fall back against the fence and I'm going to throw a long slapping hook, or I'm going to throw this hard body kick, and that's how I'm supposed to fight. Now there's more like, oh, wait, no, that's not how I'm supposed to fight.
Right.
Well, shit, what do I do? Like, I got to remember how to do the things I'm supposed to do.
Now you're second guessing reflexes if you spent 10 years ingraining.
Yeah. And that worries me. It also worries, like, the big thing that saved Rockhold in that fight, quite honestly, is the fact that Dave Branch cannot fight going forward without clinching. He can't. No. He fights, he throws one or two good power shots, and then he drives for the clinch, because that's how Dave Branch fights. He's not oh, I'm just going to play a comfortable range striking game. It's, no, I want to wrestle you down to the mat and out-grapple you there. Romero has wrestled a lot more since he remembered that he knows how to wrestle.
Since somebody told him, hey, you're one of the best wrestlers to ever do this sport. It's like, oh, I should wrestle. Good idea.
And that could be a problem for him if that leads him into bad positions with Luke Rockhold. But like, even Dave Branch had to flag notably. Like, he had to get into the clinch a few times where Rockhold could light him up with knees and start to, like, make his clinch game take over and start pulling him to the ground, and do that a couple of times before Dave Branch he was able to actually submit Dave Branch. And I don't think Romero is going to get suckered into that game enough. Like, Romero is still very willing to play a range striking game where he just waits patiently, sees, you know, has a vision quest about what his next ridiculous, out of nowhere leaping strike he should throw will be, and then picks one out of the charts and throws it. And the biggest thing is that he really likes to throw this leap in left hook where he dives into the pocket behind a left hook and then transitions that straight into a takedown. The strike Romero really likes to go to. And Rockhold's answer to a left hook is to just kind of, like, do the Harrison Ford Blade Runner, like, slap thing.
Oh, yeah. It's to just have his entire face removed by it.
Yeah. And that, it's hard to see Romero getting to pick shots like that and Rockhold surviving that. Because Romero, I mean, he might slow down a little, but his ability to pick out the right strike and throw it with power and accuracy does not go away. You know, even late in the fight when they were both exhausted against Robert Whittaker, Romero still made things work.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, you're going with Romero? Sorry, I was about to.
Romero. I think that Rockhold's inability to see, especially, like, counter hooks coming, or just even leading hooks, a lead left hook coming, jumping in, I think that's just too big a hole for him to give away.
Yeah.
Where Romero, like, he is lax defensively. He will just kind of let you throw shit at him and be like, well, I'm going to get out of the way, or, you know, I'm a phenomenal athlete, so I'm going to be in the right position to just, you know, grab this and dodge it, or grab it and throw you to the ground or something. And he eats shots because of it. But it's very rare days that he eats anything so badly that it actually turns into hurting him badly.
Yeah, and Romero almost always seems to have eyes on what's coming at him.
Yeah.
like he picks out what's about to hit him. So
yeah,
when
his ability to see what his opportunities are is matched by an ability to see what your opportunities are.
He has a great vision. I don't really know how else to say it, but he has excellent vision where nothing really escapes his attention if it's happening right in front of him. And that's not the case for Rockhold, particularly in his boxing. Like that is Rockhold's glaring weakness, is his boxing, where it's just sort of in the same way that who did I say this about before? Who was it earlier where I was like, oh, they just kind of
Jeremy Kennedy?
Yeah, maybe. We're just kind of like something's coming and I don't know what it is. Anyway, I said that earlier on this.
Yeah, that was Jeremy Kennedy.
That's kind of Rockhold. It's like if Jeremy Kennedy was a way better athlete and had like more power and especially more length, where you can just catch somebody trying to cross this big distance. Romero is not maybe like Michael Bisping, really good at technically covering distance, but he covers distance really fast, much faster than pretty much anybody else Rockhold has faced. So the interesting thing here is that Romero does have to be patient. If somebody in this bout has a stamina advantage, it's Luke Rockhold.
Yeah.
And so Romero is going to spend a lot of time at long range. And that is where Rockhold's really effective. Rockhold with his kicks, like that is where his striking skill really lies, is in picking his shots, using kicks to set up other kicks, understanding his distance when he throws them. I kind of have a feeling here that like that could be dangerous for Yoel Romero, but I also think that Rockhold is you can kind of convince him to come forward without too much work. I think it's what he really wants to do, is to have you backing up while he just marches you down with long series of kick attacks. And I'm just not confident in like Rockhold's ability to play that kind of game without running into something. It's not as if in any other area of skill that Rockhold is not the equal of Yoel Romero. If they tie up in the clinch a lot, I don't know who's going to get a takedown from that. If somebody does hit a takedown, it's probably
not a great takedown artist. No. A lot of his ability to wrestle relies on him wearing you out and then being able to like either get you to try to take him down or to like be able to just kind of hulk you to the mat.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that Rockhold is very difficult to take down. He's very resourceful when you do commit to a takedown attempt. But if somebody is making the wrestling happen here, it's probably Yoel Romero, because Luke Rockhold is not a takedown artist. Very rarely does he even force the clinch on his opponents, which is where his wrestling is really impressive. And like that's why like David Branch, as you I think very rightly pointed out, sort of gave Luke Rockhold the fight he needed to recover from a rough start, because he kept giving Luke Rockhold the clinch. And not only is Yoel Romero like probably something like Rockhold's equal wrestling in the clinch, so he can at least survive there and stop Rockhold from getting him down, but it's kind of up to him if any wrestling happens at all. So,
and Romero, like we've seen, Romero is pretty smart about knowing what fight he wants to fight. Like,
yeah, and especially so with his more recent bouts. Like the Robert Whittaker fight was a brilliant performance from Romero. He managed his energy exceptionally well. He stole time on the clock with his clinch work. He did everything he could to win that fight, and he just happened to be in there against like a phenomenal opponent who was a kind of rough style matchup for him. I think Yoel Romero. I just Rockhold. It depends on what kind of fight he gives Rockhold, but if he approaches this correctly, and I do think he can and probably will, then I think Rockhold's probably getting slept at some point.
I mean, seeing Rockhold get his bell seriously wrung by Dave Branch is just like,
well, not to keep going back to the classic example, but the man got slept by Michael Bisping.
Yeah.
I mean, that's all we need to say, is like, Michael Bisping is not some feather-fisted wimp like he's often been portrayed, and his boxing is improved with time, but he's not knocking anybody else out.
No.
Just Luke Rockhold.
Yeah. And, of course, the other part of that being that Michael Bisping is a dude that everybody else lately has figured out, oh, wait, he can't see out of one of his eyes. If I just throw hooks at him, I can just knock him out. And Luke Rockhold couldn't figure that out.
Yeah, well, he genuinely, like, up to this point in his career has never had the actual technical skills to do that.
Yeah.
He doesn't really know how to box. And
No.
I think you might be right. Like, it's possible that the Branch fight was growing pains, and now we see the stuff that Rockhold was hoping to show in that fight. And that would be awesome if he comes out here and it's like, wow, his game has really developed on the feet and he looks so much more comfortable in the pocket and managing his distance. But for his entire career, he has been a non-boxer. He has never really learned how.
He's 33 and he's been fighting since 2007. So,
yeah,
you know, he had a decade of learning to fight the way he did. And now he's changing it in like 6 months. Are we going to see a reinvented Luke Rockhold? There are so few fighters that works for. Like I can barely think of them.
Yeah, and Yoel Romero is one of them. The 39-year-old who spent his whole life wrestling and then became an MMA phenom.
It's true. All right. Well, on that note, we're gonna odds before I wrap things up. Yoel Romero is he's a underdog on one card or on one book, amazingly, but opened at minus 180 and it's currently at plus 120. So yeah, Yoel Romero is actually an underdog on a bunch of cards. Opened at minus 180, currently at plus 120. Been a steady climb. Rockhold opened at plus 150 and is now at minus 138, a steady drop. I'm surprised at that.
Yeah, I don't think it's like I'm not super confident that Romero is going to beat Rockhold. I think there's a big chance that Romero is just inactive enough that Rockhold can do work on him, but I'm kind of surprised that he's the underdog.
Yeah, it seems like a clear cut favorite fight for Romero. Like just he's the favorite, not a huge favorite, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Food for thought. I won't be acting on it. But there you have it. On that note, you can find me on Twitter at These Anytime. You can find Connor on Twitter at BoxingBush. That's BUSCH. You can find both of us over at BloodyElbow.com in our various roles week in, week out. We will be back. I'll be back for the 6th round following UFC 221, and then we will be back next week for UFC Fight Night Austin, Cowboy versus Medeiros. We'll have Vivisection, Heavy Hands, If I Did It, Care Don't Care, all our week in, week out shows. So give this one a like. It's the thumbs up down there. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, MMANation.com, DOTCOM, all spelled out. That's where you get the latest Bloody Elbow shows, videos, news, analysis, all that stuff we do week in, week out. And we will see you next time. Thanks, y'all.